fantastic. Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay Kurrle. I am the Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Labor. I'm really excited to be here today to help open up this segment of the agenda with you all today. This session will hopefully provide you all with an opportunity to learn about how the U.S. Department of Labor and the Vermont Department of Labor align our priorities and work for Southern Vermont to help expand your workforce, size, quality, whatever you need to do. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Tim Martin, who will be leading us in this important discussion. Tim is the Acting Regional Administrator for the United States Department of Labor, Employment and Training Administration. Prior to this role, Tim worked on a number of workforce development programs, including some that you all are probably very familiar with: unemployment insurance, job training, welfare to work, and numerous related grants. Tim has also worked as an attorney for the Rhode Island Department of Labor and was a Peace Corps volunteer in the South Pacific. In my time in the Department of Labor, I have had the opportunity to get to know Tim fairly well. He has been an incredible resource for us at the Vermont Department of Labor as we navigate workforce challenges and work to become more innovative, creative, and effective in the ways that we deliver services. Tim received his undergraduate degree from the University of Rhode Island and his law degree from Suffolk University Law School. Please join me in welcoming Tim Martin.
It's a long walk. Thanks, Lindsay. Again, my name is Tim Martin, and I am the Acting Regional Administrator for the U.S. Department of Labor, Employment and Training Administration's Boston Regional Office. And it really is a pleasure to be here in Vermont. I have to say, I grew up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which I don't know if folks are familiar with Pawtucket.
Woo! I
Wasn't expecting that. But Pawtucket's an old mill town, like, you know, Lowell, Lawrence, Brockton. But I can tell you, every single weekend, my mother and father loaded me and my 7 brothers and sisters into our station wagon, along with the St. Bernard, to go up to Mount Holly. So I spent most of my summers and all my weekends here, just north of here, just north of Ludlow. So it really is great to be here in Vermont. I have my best memories from childhood from being in Vermont, other than the drive up and the drive back, which was no car seats, you know, times are different, I guess. But anyway, I was asked to talk about the U.S. Department of Labor's priorities and how they align with the efforts that you have underway here in Southern Vermont. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the federal framework that we've put in place, and the way the funds flow is obviously they go from the federal level out to the state labor agencies. Oh, sorry. Better? Okay, I'll try to lean into it. The way the funds flow is the federal dollars come out and they go primarily to state labor agencies across the country. And then the state labor agencies have a lot of autonomy on how they stay within the federal frameworks and implement the programs to make sure they meet the needs of the businesses in the communities they serve, as well as the workers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then Lindsay's going to come back and then she's going to talk a little bit about how she's implementing this framework here in Vermont. Now, before I get into the framework, I did just want to say, I wanted to give a shout out to Lindsay and her team. They really are an incredible team the governor put together. Sarah and Michael, who I know is from Bennington, these folks really are second to none. And you know, I work with, our region is 10 states, but I've met a lot of the leadership from across the country, and I really think you guys are in good hands with the team the governor put together. These guys have been great partners. They're always looking for best practices from across the country, and I really think you're lucky to have the team that you have. Okay, so I spoke to Laura and Alex and other folks from the Brattleboro group in preparation for this session. And in that conversation, I think the challenge here kind of boils down to 2 things. One is how do you expand the size of the workforce? And 2, how do you improve the quality of the workforce? So those to me is sort of the 2 main buckets that I'm going to talk about. And I think, you know, when I was reflecting on this and I was saying, you know, if I was in your shoes, what would I pursue? I think there's 2, and there may be more answers. I came up with 2. I mean, people in the room may have 20. But the 2, I think you can either recruit from the outside and get people to move to the area, or you can invest in the folks that you have here and try to get people off the sidelines and try to get people to improve their skills so they can meet the in-demand occupations that you all are trying to fill. So I'm going to talk about the recruitment piece first, because that was one of the ideas I came up with, although I don't know anything about it. You know, I Googled some things and kind of try to figure out what states are doing. I know Vermont has an initiative, and I think Lindsay's going to be talking about this, about recruiting tourists to actually stay longer than a week or two here in Vermont, which to me sounds like an awesome idea. I can tell you, if that had been offered when my father was alive, I would have grown up a Vermonter, because we would have moved to Vermont. You know, and so you guys have something special, obviously, you all know. I don't have to tell you, but there really is something special about Vermont. So I think that's a great idea. In thinking about this, I also recall when I started working in Boston, when I was in my 30s, I remember that there was leadership from Vermont. I think Maine and New Hampshire used to do this as well, but leadership from Vermont would come down into Boston, and they would go to Washington, D.C. and New York, and they'd have like cocktail hours, and they would invite these 30-somethings that had moved from Vermont into the cities in an effort to try to recruit them back. And I always thought that was a cool idea, and I don't know if that's still happening, but that's something, if I were you, I would dust off that report and see if that worked, because I think that's a great idea. And I think a lot of people, I can tell you, I commute an hour and 20 minutes each way. It's tough being in Boston. You know, there's a lot to be said about working in, living in a place like Vermont. I also know, you know, in exploring some of this, I came upon some Midwestern cities, and I know Detroit does this as well as some small rural areas. What they're doing is they're offering grants to, again, the same cohort, like the 30-somethings that have moved to the big cities, Chicago and Minneapolis, and they're offering them like $5,000 to come back, and they have to use that $5,000 as a down payment for a house, which I think is a great idea, because you have a lot of these, you know, I have a senior in high school right now, a lot of these kids come out of school with a lot of debt, and they're paying $2,000 a month in rent, and they have, you know, these student loans. It's hard to get a foothold. So I thought that was kind of a cool idea. And I know Vermont has other ideas like reduced tuition for veterans and some other things. And I know this is on the mind of Lindsay and her team as well, because probably 4 or 5 months ago, right after all the hurricanes slammed into the Caribbean, our region, by the way, is New England, New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And don't ask me how that happened, but Puerto Rico's in my region. But Lindsay called and she said, you know, can you connect me with the folks in Puerto Rico? Because we'd be interested in seeing if folks that are displaced from work because of the hurricanes, if they'd possibly be interested in moving to Vermont and taking some of the job openings in Vermont. So I connected her with the folks in Puerto Rico, and you know, Lindsay didn't want to step on their toes, so that was, I think, a smart move. And you know, they were actually amenable to it. I mean, they have such a long road back. They know that a lot of folks have these short-term needs, and I don't know if folks are familiar with the economy in Puerto Rico, but there's some incredibly high-skilled workers in Puerto Rico. They have a huge pharmaceutical industry, aviation industry is really big in Puerto Rico. They had a lot of tax breaks that they ended up with these industries that are kind of cool, but are really a lot of high-skilled IT workers, healthcare workers, teachers, and others. So I guess my point is, in terms of recruiting, I think there's probably 1,000,001 ideas that you could come up with, and I would just suggest, and you guys are economic development folks, again, I probably don't have to tell you, but just measure, you know, pilot test these things, measure them, and the ones that work, kind of invest more heavily in. So that's the first thing, the whole recruitment piece. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what I know a little bit more about, and that's in investing in the folks that are living here. And the first thing I want to say is, folks, even in a good economy, folks, this churning, and folks end up collecting UI. These folks are to be directed towards the career centers, the American Career Job Centers. And I would just encourage all the business folks in the room, if you have job openings, please connect them to the career centers, because you don't want people going on unemployment insurance, collecting for a little bit, getting discouraged, not being aware that these job openings are out there, and then leave the community. So I think the first thing is just to make sure that you are all connected to the career centers here in Southern Vermont. And when you look at the unemployment rate, though later, and this may have been updated, I don't think so, but when I was preparing my notes, the unemployment rate in Vermont was 2.8%, which is like crazy low. I think it's the 5th lowest in the country. Economists say it's full employment under 4%. So you guys are really in a place where, you know, that 2.8% is probably as low as it could possibly get, I think. But that 2.8%, that's picked up on the Bureau of Labor Statistics UI3 report. And there's 6 reports, UI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the UI3 report is the one that we all pay attention to. That's the one that Wall Street pays attention to. That's the one we hear about every month. And that's your 2.8%. But let me just talk about a bit about what's in that number and what's not in that number. So the 2.8% picks up people who are out of work and they've actively looked for work over the past 4 weeks. So if you think about it, that's kind of a narrow definition. If you look at the broadest definition of unemployment insurance, the UI6 report, it picks up everybody from the UI3 report, plus it picks up people that are working part-time but want to work full-time, plus it picks up people not working who want to work, but their window of looking for a job was over the past 12 months, so it's a little bit longer, and folks that have given up working. For whatever reason, they got discouraged, they gave an economic reason for giving up working. When you look at that number, that UI6 number, that number for Vermont comes in at 6.3%. So it's more than double the 2.8%. I had to do the math, but if my math is right, it's 3.5%. So my argument is there's a lot of people on the sidelines. And I think in some ways you can recruit people, and I think that's great, and I would try to recruit people and I would look at all these different possibilities. But I would argue that in some ways the return on investment may be better to invest in the people that are here. Because you have people that come here from out of state, which again is great, but they haven't been through a Vermont winter yet, you know? These people that are sitting on the sidelines are here and they don't have a job. They want to be here. They probably have been here for generations. So, I mean, for altruistic reasons, I think it's great to get them engaged. But I think for numbers reasons, for the individual, for the businesses, and for the community, it really is important to try to get these people off the sidelines and engaged. So, let me talk a little bit about the federal initiatives and how we try to get some of these folks engaged. And the first thing I want to talk about is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. This is our new enabling legislation. And that act passed a couple of years ago, and it has a number of core pillars. And one of the core pillars is partnerships. Congress wants to make sure that the public workforce system isn't running itself in a bunch of silos. They want to make sure all of us at the federal, state, and local level partner and target these folks that are on the sidelines and get these folks engaged. And when you look at WIOA, the legislation itself, I've never seen this legislation. I was going to say, I haven't been around that long, but I've been around for 20-something years. I think I'm the old guy now. But I've never seen legislation like this, where it's enabling legislation for the Department of Labor, and it's the enabling legislation for a couple of Department of Education programs. So the state has to submit a state plan from the Secretary of Labor and Secretary of Education that's approved by the U.S. Secretary of Labor and U.S. Secretary of Education. So this really is forcing folks at all levels to partner. And it's the enabling legislation for the education programs for the voc rehab program and the adult ed program. And in the past, the voc rehab program, and I'm not an expert in voc rehab, so if there's anybody in the voc rehab community in the room or adult ed, correct me, I won't be embarrassed. But it's my understanding, voc rehab programs, historically have been in place to help people who have challenges and disabilities, to help them improve their lives and so forth. And the adult ed program was really focused on improving the literacy and numeracy skills of the communities they serve. Under this legislation, the adult ed program and the voc rehab program, like the education programs under WIOA, were all being measured on the same performance outcomes. And these performance outcomes include employment rates and earnings. So this is a shift. So now we have people in the adult ed community in the voc rehab program. They must be partners in the Career Center. They have to be working through the Career Center, getting connected to jobs or the resources they need to prepare for jobs. And the outcomes are measured on how many of these folks actually connect to jobs. So those are two populations that historically may not have been fully engaged in workforce. I think going forward, these are two pools that I think if I were sitting in your seats, I would try to tap. Again, it's the adult education folks and the voc rehab folks. The other couple populations I wanted to quickly mention are folks that are on TANF and folks that are on SNAP, the food stamps. Now, with regard to TANF under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, Congress gave governors the option. They could either keep TANF separate and run the public workforce system over here, or they could make TANF part of the public workforce system. In Vermont, this administration, the prior administration, made the decision, we want TANF to be connected to that public workforce system. So when people are collecting TANF and they're receiving TANF benefits, they're to be receiving services and being connected to the career centers here in Vermont. So that's another population that I think could be tapped to try to get them more engaged. Folks on SNAP, the same thing. They're fully engaged in the career centers. A decision has been made in Vermont to make them connected to the career centers as well. And folks on SNAP, many times these folks are working. They have the work ethic. They'll work as hard as they can. They have tougher jobs probably than anybody in this room, and they have worse hours than everybody in this room, and they're still working. They just don't make enough, so that's why they're on SNAP. I think that's another pool of people that you could tap to try to get them off the sidelines and more fully engaged. And I realize I'm mentioning these populations. These are admittedly, they can be tough populations, but that's why this legislation requires partnerships. And again, the folks at the Vermont Department of Labor that I'm working with, they're fully committed to these partnerships. So I think the time is right to really try to get these folks engaged. The other population I wanted to talk about is out-of-school youth. Now, under WIOA, there's 3 funding streams: an adult funding stream, a dislocated worker funding stream, and a youth funding stream. And it's about a third and a third and a third, pretty close. So a third of the money for WIOA on the labor side of the house is focused on youth. In the past, states had to spend at least 30% on out-of-school youth, which means they could spend 70% on in-school youth, summer jobs and so forth. Congress under WIOA flipped it, and they said, no, we want to spend 75% of that youth money on out-of-school youth, which is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge to recruit, to find these youth and connect to these youth. So the labor folks are connected to community-based organizations and other organizations to try to engage these youth. And then under WIOA, the labor folks have to offer 14 different, they're called elements, services. So they're all in on these youth to try to provide whatever services they need to help prepare these youth for a job. So these out-of-school youth, I think, are another possibly untapped potential pool of people.
What do you consider youth?
Oh, it's like I planted you out there. Youth. When I say youth, under WIOA, the definition is really young adults. It's 16 to 24. So these are, pretty mature, very mature youth, I guess you would say. They're young adults, I think. But it's 16 to 24. So this is another pool of people. Again, they're out of school. They may have some challenges that they didn't stay in school, but I think that's another potential pool of workers for you all here. And the last group I wanted to mention is the long-term unemployed. And Lindsay and I talked on the phone briefly on this, and we never reconnected, so I hope I'm not making commitments. Coming up with this idea and then leaving it for Lindsay to try to implement. But here's my premise. The long-term unemployed, Vermont Department of Labor also oversees the unemployment insurance program. So they can tell you who exhausted benefits over the last 3 years, who collected and then dropped off the unemployment insurance rolls. At least 3 years, that's for the federal requirement. Lots of states hold data longer. They may be able to go back 10 years, I don't know. But my premise is to look at the long-term unemployed, look at to see who exhausted the UI benefits, then look to see who is no longer earning wages. You could look at the wage records that they collect each quarter. You have that pool, identify who's from Southern Vermont, and then you could identify people who worked in industries that you need. The Vermont Department of Labor, I mean, I don't want to scare anybody, but when you collect unemployment insurance, they can figure out what industries folks worked in and what occupations. I think you could target your efforts. Now, coming out of the Great Recession, I think there's a lot of people that dropped out of the labor market that would have liked to have stayed. But I still think there's probably people in that pool that you could re-engage some of those folks, and they may want to come back either full-time or part-time to work. And I think you could target your efforts on the industries that you need the most help in. So I do think Vermont Department of Labor has enough data with some cross-matchers, maybe with DMV and some others, that you could target your efforts and try to re-engage these folks and get them back into the career centers. Okay, so those are the pools of potential workers. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools that are made available through the public workforce system that you may be able to deploy to kind of try to engage these folks. And I mentioned one of the core pillars of WIOA is partnering. Another core pillar is that the public workforce system really has to be demand driven. And I'm not just saying this because I'm in a room full of economic development folks, but the public workforce system has to know what the employer's needs are, the hiring needs are, before they start talking to the worker customer. So the public workforce system has two customers, and again, I think, and WIOA pushes this, we have to know the employer side of the equation first. And with regard to that, I think it's important for you all know, in the business community to know, these career centers have two customers. And these career centers, particularly for small businesses, they can be the HR office for small businesses, helping with recruitments, job fairs. I know some career centers help with job descriptions for the employer to put together. I know some career centers make space available for employers to use for interviews. So there's a lot to be done, and I encourage you to connect to the career centers and see what services they can provide you, because you are one of their primary customers. Now let me talk a little bit about the flexibilities under WIOA. So traditionally, when you looked at the public workforce system and you looked at the training programs, people think, the classroom training. Many of the populations I just mentioned, this is me, maybe a bias I think, but probably a lot of those folks probably were not successful in the classroom setting. The WIOA provides a lot of training, a lot of flexibilities around training, so that you don't have to put people in a classroom, you can get them trained up in other ways. And the first one I want to mention is under WIOA, it allows for transitional jobs. And these are subsidized employment for people with spotty work history. They're time limited, they can be in the public, private, or not-for-profit sector. And they're designed to help people get reconnected to the workforce, build their resume and prepare them to prepare for a self-sustaining job. So that's the first one, transitional jobs. The second one is on-the-job training contracts. These were always allowable, but for some reason they fell off. I don't know, someone told me it was like an OIG report or something years ago, and then everyone was afraid of OJT contracts. But OJT contracts are back in, and they're back in a big way. And basically what these are a contract between the employer and the public workforce system, and the public workforce system agrees to pay up to 50% of the salary of this individual for the extraordinary cost of training. OJTs, actually one of the people that's really sort of a national figure in OJTs is right in the Berkshires, and I could get him up here to do trainings for the folks in the OJTs or if anybody's interested. But these really are a unique training model, and it's a successful training model because as an employer, you're able to train these folks the way you want them trained. The outcome is the employee that you want. And for workers, a lot of workers, they can't afford to they can't afford to take time off and sit in a classroom for 6 months. It's an earn while you learn strategy. So they can earn some money, get the skills they need, and know that if they're successful, they can connect to a job. So that's the second one, OJTs. Incumbent worker training is allowable under WIOA. And this is just what it sounds like. These are for current employees. If you have an employee who needs a skill upgrade, but you can't afford it, and you might have to lay this person off, the public workforce system is authorized to support that individual, to support that effort with incumbent worker training. The expectation is if this person moves up the career ladder, you'd backfill that position with a new job opening. So incumbent worker training is another one. And the last one I wanted to mention is this administration, and the previous administration, by the way, is really big on the apprenticeship program. And I understand the folks in Vermont Department of Labor are really big on the apprenticeship program as well. And this is basically an OJT with related instruction and then a clear career ladder. So as this person gains the skills they need, they can progress in their career. So that's another opportunity that I think is really being pushed by the administration, and it's one of those opportunities that I think is sort of unique, and it's a work-based learning opportunity. And with regard to the apprenticeship program, my brother's a union electrician. He's had a great career. But when people think of the apprenticeship programs, they think of, like my brother, an electrician and all the trades. There's a lot of white-collar jobs now that are using the apprenticeship model. I know Zurich Insurance out in the Midwest, they're doing it for insurance adjusters. CVS is doing it for farm techs, I think they call them. So there's really, it's limitless. It's white-collar, blue-collar. If you're interested in setting up an apprenticeship, whether it's 1 or 100, please let the folks at Vermont Department of Labor know as well, and they can loop us into the regional office. We have experts that can come out and help set up those apprenticeship programs. I need a sip of water. Phew. Okay, I'm almost done now. It's a home stretch. I promise, I said it's a home stretch. Okay, so that's what I have for WIOA. I did want to mention a couple of programs for unemployment insurance, because as I mentioned, Vermont Department of Labor oversees the unemployment insurance program as well. And there's one program I want you all to be aware of. You guys call it shared, short-term compensation. Okay, I call it shared work, and I was talking to them in the hall, and they're like, no, we don't do that, and then they call it short-term compensation. I want you all to be aware of this. If you have 5 employees and you have to lay off 20% of your workforce, In the past, you'd lay off one person and you'd keep the 4 and you'd move along, and then when the cycle returned, you'd hire someone new. Under the short-term compensation, under the short-term compensation in Vermont, you can lay off all 5 individuals 20% of the time for for 1 day a week. So you keep these employees, they can collect unemployment insurance a prorated amount. But I think it's a good program, and it's not very, I'm not saying this about Vermont, nationally. A lot of people don't use it, and I think it's a great program, and I think it's a great program that helps you hold on to the workers that you need and that you invested in, and it helps the workers stay in the community. So that's a program I would follow up with the Vermont Department of Labor with. The other program is the SelfEmployment Assistance program, which only has about, I guess you used to have this in Vermont, and there's only 4 or 5 states in the country that have it right now. But I want to mention it because I think the economy is changing so much. I think this is going to be, should be back on the table. And the Self-Employment Assistance Program, what that does is when people are become unemployed, they have to be able, available, and looking for full-time work. That's sort of the rules. Under this program, these folks, instead of spending their time looking for a job, they can spend their time trying to start a business. And there's milestones that they have to, they got to connect to Small Business Administration, the folks at SCORE, they have to put a business plan in place, they have to secure funding. There's all kinds of milestones to make sure these folks stay on target. But I think with the gig economy and the increase in independent workers and everything, I think this is a program that we should be paying attention to as a public workforce system. So I'm just flagging it for you guys, and this is one of those things that I'm going to go back to Boston, and Lindsay's going to have to try to figure out here in Vermont, but I think it's a good program. And the last thing I wanted to quickly mention is, most of our monies we make available by formula that goes out to states. Occasionally we make funds available on a competitive basis, and I just want to say that right now we have an open competition to address the opioid epidemic. So I would just encourage the state of Vermont. I live in Plymouth, Mass. I know it's a huge problem in Plymouth. I think it's a problem everywhere. I assume it's a problem up here in Vermont. To explore coming in for some of those funds. The funds could be targeted to help people that are impacted by the opioid epidemic, as well as for folks who may want to train in fields like counseling and healthcare to address the opioid epidemic challenges. So Lindsay asked me to give her a heads up when I was going to call her up, but I wasn't able to flag it for you. But I do want to give you one website that has all some of the best practices that we capture nationally. You can go in there and type in economic development stuff and get some more information about some of the efforts across the country, and it's www.workforcegps.org. So again, thanks so much for having me. I mean it. I really love coming to Vermont, and I really appreciate you all including me on today's agenda. So here's Lindsay.
Thank you, Tim. Tim was gracious enough to allow me to talk a little bit more Vermont specific, and I have to say he was so entertaining, I'm not sure I want to follow him up. I just wanted to sort of, like as I mentioned, outline a little bit in terms of Vermont specific strategies that we're using, and I'll start by outlining what we believe the problem to be, and I think you'll all agree with me. I'm sure you've by now heard the governor discuss his 3-digit mantra, 631. The 6 represents 6 fewer Vermonters in the workforce every day. The 3 represents 3 fewer children in our public school system every day. And the 1 refers to the number of babies born to a mother addicted to drugs each day. At the beginning of my tenure, is this on? Okay. At the beginning of my tenure, and even today, I'm asked to evaluate decisions based on how it might impact those numbers, specifically that 6 number. Between 2010 and 2016, the state lost an average of 2,300 workers per year from our labor force. So that's how we get to the 6 per day. It's no secret that we have an aging population, so this number could represent people who are retiring, but it also unfortunately represents individuals who may have had their job eliminated or who have given up on looking for work altogether, as Tim talked about. But the bottom line is this: I think we can all agree that we need to grow our labor force. And if we can reduce that 6, we can help grow the economy, make Vermont more affordable, and protect the vulnerable. So the big picture, what is the Vermont Department of Labor doing to not only grow and expand the labor force in Southern Vermont, but all across the state? You heard Tim talk a bit about WIOA, and which is the federal law that mandates the Department of Labor to serve businesses and individual job seekers with equal energy. So we're taking a two-pronged approach. My staff presented a plan in the legislature this year. We had some wins, we had some losses, that created a plan with a few new programs to tackle some of the strategies Tim discussed. So to start with, recruiting from the outside. Stay-to-stay weekends. The Agency of Commerce and Community Development has put together an incredibly innovative, targeted campaign to attract and convert visitors from the outside to be Vermonters. I believe this region might even be involved in some of those stay-to-stay weekends. They're a great way to introduce visitors to our communities and our businesses, and we hope that we can convince them to become permanent Vermont residents. Small business recruitment. This is an area we were not so successful, but our goal is to help small businesses recruit out-of-state workers. We know that small businesses don't necessarily have the capacity to do HR recruiting like larger businesses do. So we want to be able to help with some of those connections. And despite our wins or losses in the legislature, this is a place that we're committed to helping, and we just have to get creative in making it happen. Tim talked a bit about the career resource centers for the Department of Labor, and I'm going to kind of go off track here for a second and just share one of my own stories. I am a small business owner here in Vermont. I currently own a transportation company, fuel hauling company with my husband. Prior to taking this job, we also owned a gas station and convenience store, and we had 10 employees. We found that we were sort of the jack of all trades. My husband and I were with the hiring, the firing, the fixing, you name it, that was up to us. And I spent a great deal of time trying to hire people to come work for us. I had no idea that I could have reached out to the Career Resource Center in my area at the Department of Labor to get help with that function. I wish I had known, because I really think that it would have helped us certainly, but it also would have really helped somebody who needed a job, who needed a little extra boost to break down some barriers. I think we would have been the ideal partners. Anyway, I just want to encourage you all to make sure that you do get to know your local Department of Labor Career Resource Center. We have them in Bennington, and Brattleboro, Springfield, Rutland, you name it, we have them. So let us know what your employment needs are. Back to some of our other ideas. We, as part of the Workforce Development Bill, pitched to create a relocation assistance unit in all of our regional offices. Our staff gets calls every day from individuals outside the state looking for more information about moving and relocating here. And our staff in those offices are incredibly capable and ready to assist anyone with navigating the essentials that every family and individual is looking for. And I'm not just talking about jobs. These folks in our centers know the community. They know about the housing, they know about transportation, they know about childcare. So this is a great resource and asset for all of us as well in terms of trying to recruit people into our state. Tim talked about how we invest in those individuals who are on the sidelines. And again, I feel like every Vermonter who wants to work should have a job. And it is our goal to make sure that even one person who can't provide for their family is one too many as far as I'm concerned. So through the data we collect in our UI system, we know there's a population of Vermonters who want full-time work, and they're capable of full-time work, but they can't find it. So we need, if you look at the census that's taken, we don't know the names of those people, but as Tim mentioned, there's a certain group of people who we can track because they have collected unemployment insurance, and we really need to do a better job of reaching that population and making sure that we can help them find employment. A number of our regional staff are partnering with other local agencies, stakeholders, and whatnot to provide services on site. We have 4 Department of Labor WIOA caseworkers in 4 regional recovery centers, and we plan to expand that coverage to all recovery centers in every region of the state so that we are reaching the population of individuals stuck on the sidelines because of addiction. The department has created a returnship program to provide internship-like services and activities to individuals who have been out of the labor force for an extended period of time. We're in the beginning stages of rolling this program out, but it will be statewide and serve inactive veterans, homemakers, retirees, individuals who may have been incarcerated. All of these populations have the ability to work, and they might be looking for work, and they just need a little bit of help getting retrained or upskilled. I will end by saying that every region is unique, and I'm aware of some of the challenges that this region is facing as well. While the unemployment rate and the number of unemployed has declined in the area since the recession, The 4 southern counties are still facing a declining labor force and declining employment. This trend covers the last 10 years since the last economic peak of 2007, and we actually see this same trend facing all of rural America. It is my hope that with the strategies that I have expanded on today, that we're able to reverse or slow the trend, and that we're willing and ready partners to work with you to address all of your unique labor challenges. If there's one thing I've learned in the last year and a half since taking this position, is that when we act as a team and work as a team and communicate, we really can accomplish great things. I'm excited to be here with you all today. I'm excited to learn more and listen throughout the day. And I just want you all to know that at the Department of Labor, my door is always open. So please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much.
If anyone has questions, we have a microphone, and Lindsay and Tim can answer those questions.
Hi, I'm Cora Skeel. I work at Mondo Media Works. And I want to talk to your point about these sort of sideline populations you're talking about, and specifically groups of people who are receiving benefits of some kind, SNAP, TANF, Section 8 housing. Conversations that I've had, and this is clearly anecdotal, but conversations I've had with folks who are part of those populations often come back to this idea that they perhaps want to marry their partner or get a job that pays better, or perhaps a full-time job, but their concern is that the wages are not high enough that they'll be able to support their family without those benefits. So, for instance, housing. This is a recent example. I was speaking to somebody, and their concern was that if their partner were to move in with them, they would no longer be eligible for Section 8 housing, but there was nothing in the area that they could afford, even if she found a higher-paying job. So I'm wondering if this is something you've thought about and how you might address that issue, because I think it is a real concern for those populations.
I'll take it first crack at it. I mean, I don't know if everybody calls it this, but this is called the cliff effect, which I've talked to my partners at Health and Human Services, and they're very focused on this issue. And actually, the woman, Elaine Zimmerman, the new regional administrator there, she's focused on addressing this cliff effect. And what she wants to do is she's trying to find a local community where she could go in with all the federal partners and see if we can tackle this issue in practice. Because I think there's a lot of theories out there about how to do it, but you're right, every federal program has these different requirements, and that's the challenge. But I will, if we could put a pin in it, I would love to loop back with you guys, because I know Elaine Zimmerman has been talking to me, asking me if I know of a community that would take this on and try to figure out how we could do a better job of trying to align all these federal resources through the states that we work with to try to tackle this. So I don't know if it's not a great answer, but I'd love to get you a card and loop back with you.
Sure, sounds great. I'll find it.
My name's Wayne Esty. I wanted to clarify what you mean by unavailable for work when you're talking about families with, or a worker with preschool children, they're not available. Families with school-age children who are only available 8 to 2, and those who are taking care of the sandwich generation, they're older parents, and they're not available either. How do you reach those people? What kind of services do you provide to them?
Well, one thing, I think when I was talking about the able and available piece, what I was talking about specifically was the unemployment insurance program, so that narrow program. To collect unemployment insurance, you have to be able and available. But the other thing is, and again, I don't want to punt to Vermont on this one, but WIOA is requiring their career centers to partner with the other federally funded programs, as well as community-based organizations and others, to provide those supports. So if there's transportation issues or childcare issues, the career centers, and I hope I'm not raising the bar too much at you guys, but this is the expectation from where I sit in Boston, which I understand I'm not on the ground. The expectation is that they're partnering with the local community organizations so that if someone comes in with a work-related issue, they can help address that work-related issue. And then if there's other issues, such as childcare, transportation, or something else, they can connect them to the resources in the local community to cover those challenges as well.
Absolutely what we're working on.
Except that maybe there aren't any.
Aren't any resources?
Yes, inadequate.
I'd like to follow up on that point if I could. And Lindsay, I really appreciate that you said the 3 things that you work on with families. The first 3 things are jobs, housing, and childcare. I think childcare plays a huge piece in terms of economic development for Vermonters. We have plenty of parents who might want to have a job but can't get a job because they can't find childcare, or they can't afford to pay for childcare. So in the last, I've been working in early education for the last 30 years, and I'd like to see childcare raise to the importance that it should, and how much it makes a difference for the community.
Hear, hear.
I can just say, this is a huge challenge. It's not unique to Southern Vermont, I can assure you. And again, this woman, Elaine Zimmerman, that I mentioned earlier, who's at HHS, she's focused on this cliff effect thing, but also a 2-gen approach to serving families. And that gets, people are nodding their heads. I think people in the HHS community probably knows what the 2-gen approach is. But it's basically serving a customer and serving their children or their parents at the same time. And we've supported at the U.S. Department of Labor some 2-gen approaches. I know in Boston, a group ABCD, I was at a recent graduation where it was a 2-gen approach, where they had people come in for training. At the same time when they were receiving the training, they had a daycare center on site to make sure that the children were taken care of and the parents could get their head in a place to actually be doing the work and not have to be worrying about their kids. So there are models out there. We've supported them. I mentioned that we support some of these competitive grants, and that's on the competitive side of the house. So they're real targeted approaches. It certainly doesn't meet the need out there. But there are programs that have been successful out there that have been supported by the U.S. Department of Labor. And again, and I know Elaine Zimmerman, who I'm talking with, I'll have 2 things on the agenda when I talk to her. It'll be the cliff effects and 2-gen approaches. And maybe it's something we can explore with the community here in Southern Vermont to see if we can get HHS and Department of Labor to work together and work with the community here to try to pilot things, try to figure it out, because it is a huge challenge.
Yeah, and I will just add, in Vermont, we do recognize, obviously, this is probably bigger than I'm capable of responding to specifically, but I will say that the Department of Labor does work with child care apprenticeship grants. It's a little bit at a time, but it is important. I'll mention I'm a mother of 3 children, and I often scratch my head and think, how would I have gotten through it without the help of my family as well? I was lucky to be able to find affordable I call it affordable, it was expensive, but I had family to help too, and I often think about the folks that don't have that, and so it's very much on the forefront of our minds, but we're trying to work through it.
And it's very difficult to balance the cost of childcare against the wage of the people who are providing that childcare.
Absolutely.
And that shouldn't have to be.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, if there are any additional ones.
Hi, I'm Dimitri Garter. I'm part of a team that has built an entrepreneurial hub in Bennington called the Lightning Tower. So Tim, you had talked about an incentive program that creates resources for folks that are on the sidelines to create businesses, and it requires them to connect with SCORE and some other programs. How's that being implemented in Vermont? How can we tap into that?
That's a specific program to the unemployment insurance program. It's called the SelfEmployment Assistance program. And again, in most cases, when people are collecting unemployment insurance, they have to be able, available, and looking for full-time work. What this program does is, instead of spending your time looking for that full-time job, you can spend your time and energies while you're collecting unemployment insurance to start that business. And then, what I was saying is there's milestones in there, like we don't want you telling us you're starting a business. We want to know when you're connected to SCORE. We want to know where's your business plan, all those things. With that being said, there's probably only 4 or 5 states that have this program. Vermont had it in the past and no longer has it, which isn't a ding on Vermont at all. there was probably like 8 or 9 states, and it kind of fell off, and I don't know why it fell off. But the reason I raise it is because I think with the economy, the way the economy's changing, I think that's an important tool for economic development folks to know that's in the toolbox and a possibility. You might want to work with the Vermont Department of Labor to ask them to reintroduce legislation. It's allowable at the federal level. They could probably pull out their old legislation and reintroduce it. But I do think it's an important program, but it's targeted for folks who are collecting unemployment insurance.
That's all the time we have for questions. Thank you very much, Tim and Lindsay. Appreciate your time. Thanks.